Harvard Divinity School.
100 Years Rudolf Steiner, December 15th and 16th, 2025.
Our fourth speaker now is Ismar Smith. Now I forgot how to pronounce the name. Rachmann, a Brazilian director, theater pedagogue, and actor. He co-founded and directs Estelar de Teatro, a theater company with nearly 20 years of experience presenting artistic pedagogical work nationally and internationally. Ismar Smith Rachmann is currently a PhD candidate in performing arts at the University of São Paulo. His research focuses on anthroposophical influences in the work of Michael Chekhov. Please join me in welcoming Ismar Smith Rachmann, who will speak on Michael Chekhov's biography as an artistic expression of Rudolf Steiner's spiritual science.
Good afternoon, everyone. Before we begin, I want to ask you something, okay? So please take a deep breath. Once again. And place your attention at the center of your chest. Then imagine that a light is shining there. And imagine a bright sun radiating from the center of your chest. A light that reverberates throughout all this room. With regard to the ways Michael Chekhov is viewed in the theater world, I have seen a certain mismatch of perspective around anthroposophy. I will cite two types of approach as examples. On the one hand, there are people who prefer to see in Chekhov above all his Russian theatrical and spiritual lineage, without considering his connection to Steiner's practices. On the other hand, there are artists and schools that bring anthroposophy as an ally of Chekhovian technique. For example, the Michael Chekhov International Academy in Berlin, directed by Jörg Andres, where I am pursuing teacher training and experience this alliance in practice. Between these two views of Chekhov, one can sometimes sense a silent tension. The starting point of this talk is a question that is simple to state but complex to develop. To what extent can the Michael Chekhov technique be understood not only as an acting approach, but also as a specific form of translating Rudolf Steiner's ideas into theater? At the same time, this technique remains connected to the Russian theatrical and spiritual tradition of the turn of the 20th century. Here, I propose to test a hypothesis of a double lineage. Chekhov's technique as a development of anthroposophy in the field of actor training and, at the same time, as the product of a Russian genealogy that does not dissolve when he draws closer to Steiner. Michael Chekhov developed one of the most distinctive and influential pedagogical approaches to the acting in the 20th century. His technique is fully functional without any explicit reference to anthroposophy. Concepts such as the imaginary center, psychological gesture, radiating atmosphere, and so on operate autonomously within theater pedagogy. However, when one has some anthroposophical knowledge, the resonance becomes clear. The way Chekhov articulates thinking, feeling, and willing, his meditative exercise on creative imagination, the notion of an imaginary body, of a character's higher self, and the work with subtle force that radiate and are received on the stage reveal a deep affinity with the field proposed by Steiner, bringing different colors to our understanding of what is intangible in the actor's work. Within this context of tensions, more than in the search for a single answer about the true Michael Chekhov, that this presentation seeks to move. At the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th, Russia experimented an intense climate of spiritual seeking and mysticism, especially among symbolist artists. The scholar Viviane Costa Dias observes that the acting system created by Konstantin Stanislavski, co-founder of the Moscow Art Theater, emerges within this context of the so-called Silver Age. Nietzsche's ideal of the Superman is transposed into the artist. Theater is conceived as a space for the revelation of the soul, like a temple, and art as a spiritual experience. Research by Stefan Polyakov also points to Goethe as a shared source for Stanislavski and Rudolf Steiner. When Michael Chekhov enters the Moscow Art Theater and then the first studio, he arrives at a laboratory in which technique and spirituality are already intertwined. Stanislavski recalls that Sularzinski dreamed of creating a kind of spiritual order of artists. There, the two of them turn rehearsal into research, investigating the relationship among body, emotion, imagination, and inner life. Chekhov's biography is marked by intense crises, alcoholism, episodes of depression, and emotional collapses. Even so, he quickly gains recognition in Moscow and becomes a central figure at the first studio. In the midst of one of these crises, he founds the Chekhov studio, which helps him get through a difficult period. Inspired by Stanislavski methods, he creates and systematizes exercises for the actor's art. In parallel, he deepens a more conscious inner search. He reads about yoga, draws closer to the theosophical society and to spiritualist circles, until he realizes that his difficulties may also have a spiritual dimension. It is in this context that the name Rudolf Steiner appears. According to his autobiography, the first time he hears Steiner's name is when Stanislavski mentions him in conversations about the art of speech, with no greater impact at that moment. Later, Chekhov buys the book Knowledge of the Higher Worlds and Its Attainment out of curiosity, reads it, and sets it aside. Only when he rereads it sometime later does his impression change. He is struck by the sober, non-esoteric tone with which Steiner approached self-observation, imagination exercises, and ways of perceiving intangible realities. In private demonstrations during the war, he recognizes in eurythmy an attempt to make visible through movement forces he already intuited in the actor's work. Rhythmic dynamics, soul qualities, gestures that go beyond conventional gesticulation. According to Mel Gordon, uniting the inner truth of Stanislavski's system with Steiner's spiritual beauty becomes his obsession. In speech formation, he finds the idea that each sound has a plastic and dynamic quality in direct dialogue with his explorations. Chekhov met Steiner in person twice, in 1922 and 1924. In 1922, Chekhov takes over the direction of the first studio and decides to stage Hamlet. He invites the symbolist writer Andrei Belly to offer lectures on anthroposophy to the company. Belly was a follower of Steiner and was returning from Darnak. In that period, Chekhov was already experimenting with procedures connected to eurythmy, even while living in a Soviet Union closer to a spiritualist approaches. According to Yana Merzon, it was Belly who firmly linked Chekhov to anthroposophy and to Steiner's artistic world. In a letter sent to Ivanov Razumnik in 1925, Belly reports that they saw Chekhov's Hamlet many times growing more impressed each time. He comments that the actors went to rehearsals as one goes to a temple, and that the production was staged like a prayer. According to Belly, Chekhov almost fled the theater toward anthroposophy, but when he returns to the stage with Hamlet, he gives back to art what he received from Steiner. The partnership deepens in Pittsburgh, an adaptation of Belly's novel, in which both developed a plastic alphabet of language. Letters, syllables, and phrases are worked as movements and gestural scores. Chekhov masters this vocabulary to such a degree that, according to Maria Knebel, he is able to accompany with his body a text he hears for the first time as if in a eurythmic recital. Also important in this context are the letters to his faithful partner and friend Viktor Gromov, writing in 1926. On vacation in Italy, passing through Berlin, Chekhov receives through Mary Steiner a copy of Rudolf Steiner's course on speech and dramatic art, later known as speech and drama. Chekhov knew he might not be able to bring the book to Russia due to Soviet restrictions on spiritual publications. For this reason, in the letters to Gromov, he not only comments on the course, but produces in Russian a systematic summary of its content. By the late 1920s, Soviet surveillance and censorship made Michael Chekhov's continued presence untenable. In 1927, he was denounced as an idealist and a mystic for his use of eurythmy and his interest in Rudolf Steiner. In August 1928, invited by Max Reinhardt to perform in German, he immigrated immediately to Berlin so as not to be arrested. Michael Bauer, one of Rudolf Steiner's earliest followers and a personal friend, was a kind of guide and mediator in Chekhov's approach to anthroposophy. Ill for years, together with his caretaker Margaret Morgenstein, Bauer welcomed Chekhov from the first visit as a close friend, and the two held long conversations. Chekhov reports that at night, Margaret would sometimes read Steiner's lectures aloud and share personal experiences. These exchanges made possible for him a deeper and more mature understanding of anthroposophy. Bauer told him that access to supersensible knowledge is not the privilege of a few. Anyone can develop it. In letters exchanged between Bauer and Chekhov, we see this relationship more concretely. Bauer comments on imaginative exercise Chekhov is practicing, insists on the need to persevere over the course of years, draws attention to the dangers of measuring spiritual results on short time frames, and speaks explicitly of a possible sacred art of acting that he sees in Chekhov. Chekhov went from Berlin to Paris, Kaunas, and Riga until 1936. He found in the English countryside a relatively stable place to bring this experience together. The Chekhov Theater Studio, inaugurated in 1936 at Dartington Hall under the administration of Beatrice Straight, fulfilled Michael Chekhov's long-standing project of creating a laboratory school for actor training, inspired by the experience of the Moscow Art Theater for Studio with Stanislavski, and including Steiner's practices. There, he had stable material conditions and time for research. The course brings together an international group of students and integrates eurythmy and speech formation into acting techniques. Alice Crowther, trained in Dornach, teaches these classes. Deirdre Hurst Dupré records Chekhov's classes, now preserved in physical archives and in part digitally. In this context, Chekhov systematizes training for the actor, such as imagination, exercise, psychological gesture, atmosphere, and the imaginary center, among others. Because of the threat of war, the studio was transferred to Hangfield, United States, in 1938. Research and training activities continued for some time until they were interrupted by the enlistment of some actors for the battlefront in 1942, which led to the definitive closure of the school and the end of the project. In the last years of his life, Michael Chekhov lived in Hollywood, where he acted and taught film acting, coaching even already established performers. He continued developing his physical and imaginative pedagogy in small groups and private lessons. As we have been able to follow, Michael Chekhov's trajectory reveals a discipline of study and a long term fidelity to anthroposophy. Can we really understand the so-called Chekhov technique as a specific development of anthroposophy in the field of theater pedagogy? Returning to the hypothesis of a double affiliation, to what extent can Chekhov's technique be understood at one and the same time as a branch of Russian theater and as a branch of anthroposophy? And to what extent might the artistic biography and practical contributions occupy a more central place in anthroposophical studies? Embracing this double lineage opens further perspectives. For example, it makes more explicit the possibility of using Chekhovian exercise in creative process in Waldorf schools, in theater productions, or in teacher education, not as something external to anthroposophy, but as one of its developments within the art of acting. In July 2024, I was at the Goetheanum during the celebration of 100th anniversary of Steiner Dramatic Arts course. I was able to see that both sides already maintain a strong connections around the world, and my presence here today is a concrete example of that. More than offering definitive answers, this conclusion aims to open a field of debate and suggest the need for further research that connects theater history, acting pedagogy, and anthroposophy. Instead of asking who is right or which tradition is more legitimate, the task is to investigate how Michael Chekhov's experience as an artist, a pedagogue, and anthroposophist can nourish formative and scenic practice in the present. And to conclude, I will leave one last question to echo in this room. What is the importance of this mutual strengthening between Chekhov and Steiner for the contemporary artist and for contemporary theater and for the anthroposophy? Thank you very much.
Sponsored by the Program for the Evolution of Spirituality.
Copyright 2023, President and Fellows of Harvard College.